So welcome everybody for today's API training session for internal and DS people and partners and clients. Today Simon will walk us through how to build a funding pipeline with the Dimensions API. On Thursday, Michele, just to make a little bit of advertisement as well, will do a deep dive into the DSL language because that has been requested by a couple of participants. So I hope that everything is okay and that the new normal is not getting to you yet. It certainly is to me. And with that, I hand it over to Simon for the quick general introduction. Thanks.
Lovely. Okay, so as per usual, I'm going to start off with a quick 10-minute overview of the Dimensions API, and then, as Christian was saying, we'll cover a particular topic today about how to model, how to create a funding pipeline from the Dimensions API data. Okay, so now I think I tried this, and aha. Is this the one? Lovely. This is going to work. To keep myself entertained and you entertained, I'm trying different ways of explaining the API each time. So we'll see how this goes. Okay. So to start off with, the API basically allows you to do everything that you can do through the front end and more. More than that, the way the API is constructed is that to think about how to use the API is exactly the same as thinking about how to use the front-end tool. So up the top here, we've got the search bar. So if we say, I'll replicate what I'm doing on the left-hand side using the API and on the right-hand side using the front end. So if we search for nanotechnology, like that. Here we get 963,000 publications. And if we do the same thing with the API, and we use the API syntax right, we are going to get exactly the same number of publications, so 963,000 publications. So the top part of the API of how to use the search API is just search publications. And when we're doing that, we're searching this publications bucket. But we could have said search data sets or search grants or search patents or clinical trials or policy documents. And in this case, we're returning information about the publications down the side. Now, just like up the top bar, I can do different things. So I've got full data or title and abstract only or DOI. I can do similar things with the API. So if I wanted to say search publications in title abstract only, and I've got the probably spelled something wrong, which I normally do. Go. See, now I'm searching just the title and the abstract, and I'm getting 75,000, exactly the same way as I would search the front end as well. So the next thing you would do through the front end of the system is that you might want to refine your results. So you've got 75,000 results coming through, and you might want to just pick a couple of years. So we will pick 2018, 2019, 2020. We'll limit it to those years. And we might be interested in pure gold. And now we've got 1,694 in there. So now we can do exactly the same thing with our API. We can say where. And underneath the where clause is we're going to include anything that we can see here, more or less. So these are all of our facets. So in this case, we're going to say where year in, what did we say, 2018 to 2020, and in this case it is open access categories equals, I think, something like pure gold. And we can click that button, and no doubt I've done something wrong, but I'm actually not afraid of doing things wrong with the API because it's very good at telling you what I've done wrong. So in this case, I've got the syntax right, but I probably have got the open access category wrong. So we'll just go for one that I know. And if I want to use the API to have a look at categories, I can actually do that quite simply. So if I publications, I want to look up something, return open access categories. And course. Okay, where my brain is not talking to my fingers, that's okay. Where did it go? And that is not the result that I'm expecting. Yeah. Oh, it's because I've got something else coming down the bottom. There we go. So again, it should be as simple as if I want to use the API to look up the values of a particular category, I can go search publications and I can return the unique values here. So I can say, in fact, what I wanted in this case was gold pure. So we'll add that. Go, and now we've got our publications 1,694 as we do on the front side. So we've done a search up the top. We restricted to title and abstract because we decided to, because in this case we decided we wanted to. We've faceted our results, we've used a where clause on the side. And now, just like I've foreshadowed, in this case, we're going to look at our analytical views, which in the case of the interface are on the right-hand side of dimensions. So in the analytical views, we get to see things like, for the given search that we've applied, what are the number of publications that match different research categories? So we've got a number coming up under chemical sciences, physical chemistry, engineering, open access, researchers, journals, publishers, funders, research orgs, etc. So basically what this is doing is it's going over the bucket information that we've queried, in this case publications, and it's counting up the number of times each, in this case, researchers appearing on the grants, or the number of open access categories, for instance, or publishers and so on. And we can do exactly that with the API. So instead of choosing publications, if I wanted to say, okay, for this set of articles on nanotechnology that are pure gold between 2018 and 2020, I want to see who the research organizations are. I can ask for research orgs. And there we go. Now it's giving me the research orgs ordered from 1 to 20 because I haven't specified how many that I want. So the top 20 research orgs in this particular search are Shanghai, and then University from Malaysia, then Romania, and so on. And you can see that I've got lots of lovely information about these institutions coming through, which is excellent. And then probably the last thing to cover with the API in terms of basic overview is that you can control how many results you get back. So if I want to get up to 1,000 results coming through for my analytical views. So these are the reviews coming through on that side. I can specify a limit of up to 1,000. If I am just searching publications, so I'm not in analytical views, I'm now in the middle bit here, so publications or data sets or grants, I can actually get up to 50,000 public articles coming through or items coming through, but I need to do that in sets of 1,000, which is a bit of a pain. And because it's a bit of a pain, Michaela's actually written some really nice functions to loop through those results. So really the only time that you really need to specify a limit is when you're looking at the analytical views on the side. Otherwise, you can bring them down through the main set. So if we go through here to publications, and I do this, that will get me all 1,694 publications, which is to say, and it's something that we've been doing in our talks recently, is the API is obviously a RESTful interface that you can query like this. But really, when we talk about the API, we really often talk about it in conjunction with a wrapper library called Dimcly, which is what I've been using here in a Jupyter notebook to run through the commands. So that's really an introduction to how we use the API. If you're getting started with the API, you might start actually just playing with the syntax within the actual application itself. So when you log into Dimensions for the first time and you've been given access to the API, the way you'll know is that you'll have a workflow tab up the right-hand corner. And if you click on the menu items, you should see API come up here. Now, if you're in an institution with single sign-on, what we'll probably do is give you a separate account for the API. And the reason for that is that when you're using the API in scripts or you're using it in different with different applications, you might want to leave your password and files and those sorts of things. And that's not something that institutions normally encourage you to do with your single sign-on login details. So having a separate login for the Dimensions API is actually quite a sensible thing to do. So if you've accessed the API, you've logged in, you've got access to the API, you've clicked the menu button, you will see the syntax come up in the middle. And you'll end up with an ability to start playing with the API directly in the application. So you don't have to worry about anything else. You can just start writing queries and have a look at what comes back. Now, without the Dimcly wrapper, what comes back is going to be a JSON object, but you can get a sense for what's going on just straightforwardly in the application. The most important part about this screen, though, is the API documentation. So if you go up here in the right-hand corner, you can go straight to the API documentation, and it's really well written. It's really comprehensive, and literally, if you started from the top and worked your way through, you would come away with a very comprehensive view of everything that's going on in the documentation. Every time I come back here, there's something new I haven't seen. The thing I saw this morning was some really nice, and they've probably been here for ages, but some really nice layouts of the relationships between the different entity types, so grants, publications, and clinical trials. And if you were here for the presentation we did last week on using lists, these links between things is a really critical thing. So having that laid out is super helpful. So you can see actually the relationships between all the different things in the API documentation. If we go back, the other super useful thing about this screen is it has a link to the Dimensions API lab, which is maintained by Michaela. And it has lots and lots of different examples of how to use the Dimensions API. So if you've not come to our webinars before, you might be wondering what on earth that thing was that I was using the API in the left-hand side of the screen. And that was a Jupyter notebook. In fact, it was a notebook that we run using Google Colab, and Michaela's done some nice work to make sure that the Dimcly library integrates with Google Collaboratory. A notebook is simply a nice way of creating a recipe or a sequence of things that you want to do to data, that you do them in order. So you start from the top, you have just like a normal recipe, you start with your ingredients, which are libraries. So here's the Dimcly library that's put in the top. Here's a library for dealing with the data called pandas, and pandas is essentially spreadsheets for Python. and a number of things we do. And then basically the notebook, you steps through cell by cell. So in this case, we log in and then we do a number of things through. So that's the 10-minute overview of the Dimensions API, and hopefully with a little bit of variation from last time. And now I'm going to jump in to talk about how we can use the Dimensions API to build a funding pipeline. And the reason I thought this would be interesting to people is that last time we talked about how we can use the API to go beyond what the interface does and look at lists. And the power of lists is that you can take the results of one query and use them as input into another query. So you can ask for things like, tell me about the grants that were acknowledged in the set of publications that I searched for, which is a common thing that we might do. So using lists is really interesting. The other thing that makes using the API really powerful is the ability to manipulate the data once you have it, once you've got the results of your search. And building a funding pipeline is a really good example of what you can do to what you would need to do to a good example of being able to take the results and use them and manipulate them to get what you want. So if we just get a funding pipeline up in the front end, so it's interesting. There we go. So we'll pick research orgs. And go with University of Melbourne. And we go across to our overview and we pull up the overview of, we're now looking at publications, but I want to switch to grants. And we have a look at analytical views and look at the overview section. If we pull down the tab, we can have a look at the amount awarded by year. And what this graph is doing is that it is taking the grants that have been awarded to the University of Melbourne, and then it is modelling how that money might play out over a number of years. So if we know that a grant was awarded in 2007 and went through to 2020 and it had a particular amount associated with it, we need to model how that amount is distributed over the life of the grant. And so the Dimensions team have been quite clever in the way that they've done it. So they have broken the amount allocated equally to the months of the respective funding period. In fact, they've done something more than that. I think they've modelled it, they've applied an overlay to that model, but more or less they've modelled it out by month. And then they've also taken into account things like different currencies and exchange rates and what they were in any given year, which is quite complicated. We're going to do something similar, and we're going to take the amount that has been awarded in each given year, and then we're going to break that down into the months and apply that over the active years and sum it up that way, which will give us a result similar, but not exactly the same to the one you see in the front end. Okay. So with that, I will maximize the notebook and see how we go. Okay, so as we start at the start, we shall log into our Dimensions client. Okay. That's not going to work. Enter in our password. There we go, and we're connected. Now we should cover a session, and perhaps Michaela will go into it next week as well. There are different ways to authenticate the Dimensions client. You don't necessarily need to always put in your username and password, you can actually have that stored locally on a file on your file system as well. We'll import some libraries. And now we're going to start with extracting the grants out for this particular research org. So really simple query, search grants, where researchorgs.id is the ID for the University of Melbourne. So we'll take out those grants. And whilst it's getting the results, we'll just look at what we're going to do with them. So as I said, to take out the information from the API, we're going to get information about what the start year was, what the start date was, the amount awarded, and hopefully what the end date was. And then we need to take that amount and chop it up and allocate it smoothly over the number of years of award so that we can start aggregating things up and see how the money was available to researchers year by year. So to do that, we really just need to create a function. And this is why working with the dimensions client and Python is quite powerful. So this is a pretty straightforward function. We're going to calculate the fraction of the award that is going to be allocated for a given active year. So if we just have a look at what we're doing, we're taking the start date and the end date, and if both start date and the end date are present, then we are going to calculate the duration of the grant. So the end date, the end year minus the start year, and the difference between the months. And then we're just going to cut that up and allocate it by active year. And that's what this function is doing. And I've documented a little bit to take you through the steps. So we've got the information out. We will load our function in. And then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to have a look at the information that we've got back. So at the moment, we've got back a data frame, again, using a wonderful command from Michaela's library. So we've got DSL loop df, which goes and gets us all of the grants according to this query up to 50,000. And we can see that we've got the information coming back here. We've got funding amounts in different currencies. We've got the abstract. We should have the active year as a list coming through this somewhere in this information as well. We have a look here and we ask for yeah, and start. We can see that our information is coming through. So for every given row that we see at the top, we've got a list of the years coming through along with other things like start date. So the first challenge is, because we're going to cut up the information by active year, we need to take this list of information that is recorded in this data frame here and create a row for every single one of these values. Now, Pandas has, the data frame has a wonderful way of referring to that. We're going to take that table and we're going to explode it into a list here. So if we take that list, and now we've got, if we have a look at the results of that list, we can see that we've now got active year broken up into, too many things in this list. You can see now it's broken up one row per item in that list. Great. So we've got active year, we've got a function to split it up. And so what we're going to do is we're going to calculate an award fraction per active year of how much of the award to allocate. I'm not going to worry too much about this syntax, but all I'm doing is it's using the function that we defined up above, passing in for each row the start date and the end date and the active year, and from that creating a fractional amount that is associated with the active year of the grant, and multiplying that with the total. In this case, we're using the funding amount in US dollars. And if it doesn't find the information it's looking for, it's just going to print it out to the screen to let me know that not all grants can be allocated in this way, because not all grants come from the funding bodies with start dates and end dates, or in fact funding amounts. So it's just a way of letting you know that this is always just a partial solution or partial view of the data. Okay, so we've got our data, we've got it listed by active year, we've got the partial amounts, and now we are going to use our DataFrame to group the information up. Now, if you're used to using Excel, this is something you would do in Excel. This is kind of like a pivot table. You would group the information up, in this case, by active year, and we're summing across all the award fractions for all the different grants. And we're going to get now a graph that has the two peaks that you may have noticed briefly from before. So we've got now a graph that allocates the grant smoothly across the number of years, and you'll see it's reasonably smooth up until 2020, and then, as you would expect, it drops off a cliff because obviously we don't have grants awarded in the future. We've only got them awarded up until halfway through the year of 2020. Okay, so a nice bit of data manipulation that we've done with our data frame and our query. What does this graph tell us? So the first thing we might not want to know is, where did the funding come from? So in any given year, we know that the money that researchers are working from is a combination of money that's awarded in different years going through the past. So we might want to look at this graph, and instead of looking at it as a single line, create a bar chart where the elements of the bar chart are the different pockets of funding that have come from different years. So if we take that and we look at our funding start year as what we're going to put on the x-axis, and we might only be interested, what we're going to put on the y-axis, and we're only interested in really more recent funding. So we're going to group up everything that's before 2009, and we group our information together. We can create a table here. You can see that the amounts of funding that's now summed up by the active year, and now that's quite straightforward to graph into a bar chart. And this is actually one of my favorite ways of representing funding amounts, because you can see if you have a successful year, then that money is going to come, that is going to have implications over the next 4 to 5 years, that the success of that money flowing through. If you don't have a great year, then that year is going to have implications again. It's going to put strain on your institution for years to come. So there really is pressure on institutions to do well every year, all the time. The other way to think about it is if you go out to 2024 here, almost all of the research that is being done by this institution is going to be the results of grants that have not yet been won. So although this looks quite stable over time, all of those grants have yet to be won, which means that the institution is constantly having to convince somebody else to fund it to do the work they've done. So it's quite a nice way of communicating the effort that is constantly going on at institutions just to get the money to do the things that they want to do year on year. So the other way to look at that information is to say, well, okay, can we chop that up by different funding sources? So similar thing, we will just, instead of pivoting by year, we'll now pivot by the funding source. And that was another column that was coming through the grant. So now we can see for the University of Melbourne, it's going to be more or less 50% funded by the Australian Research Council, which is arts and sciences, and then medicine funding coming through from the National Health and Medical Research Council in that sort of mid-tier green, and then these other colours being different other sources that we can detect through dimensions coming through the grants. Now, obviously, this is still an approximation, even though University of Melbourne is in fact listed on all of these grants. If they've awarded them in concert with other institutions, then you might want to model that more sophisticatedly. So you might want to say, okay, well, if this grant is a grant that's in combination with Melbourne and Monash, we'll award, say, 50% of that grant to each of those institutions, or do something like that. Again, it's a model. Institutions have more accurate information but it allows you to see what's going on, which is really interesting. Just skip through this because I want to cover a different example as well. So we've broken it up by funding body. Again, we can break up this pipeline by fields of research. So fields of research was another item coming through the data frame that came through from that very simple query. So remember, we started with a query that was as simple as search grants where researchorgs.id equals the University of Melbourne return grants all. So the other thing that we can get out of that data is a list of the fields of research. So just like, and the keyword there is list. So just like we exploded the active years, we're going to create a different row for each of the fields of research allocated to the grant. And we're also going to calculate the number of fields of grants so that we can apportion the amount of the grant equally across those fields of research. So again, it's just, once we've done that, it's just a matter of piping that through to create a graph, which we will do. So there you go. Now I've got an example of the different fields of research that are contributing to the funding pipeline of the University of Melbourne. So you can see it's very highly medical in blue there. The greens are the sciences, and the more red colours are sort of social sciences coming through. Okay, so that's an institutional example. What about a different sort of example of looking at the pipeline? Because we have such an amount of data now coming through for COVID-19, we can actually look at the funding pipeline for researchers who are contributing to COVID-19 research. So if we start with getting the grants, and the way we're going to get the grants is doing exactly what we did with last Monday's session. We're going to use the results of one query and put them into another query. So in this case, we're going to search for all of the publications related to COVID-19, and we're going to extract the supporting grant IDs. And then we're going to get those grant details, and we're going to create a list of them, and we're going to put them back into a second query. And we're going to use the trick that we learnt on Monday of chopping that list up into sets of 250 items so that we can get all of the information that we need for all of those grants. And we're going to join them back up together again. But apart from those steps, it's exactly the same concept as before. And I think we've got time to run it. So I think each week we've been doing a COVID-19 example. I think when we started 3 weeks ago, it was at 12,000. There are now 19,000 articles or pieces of publications inside Dimensions on COVID-19 matching that search, which is amazing. It's I've never seen a set of information on publications that is so similar to watching the stock market each day in terms of the amount of information that's coming through. Okay, so pretty quickly, you can see the Dimensions API is looping through and getting all of those publications down to all the way down to 19,000. And then from those, it's extracted out the grant IDs that it's referenced. That's going to go through and get those, and it won't take too long. And you can see each batch, it's saying, hey, I've got this set of sort of grant IDs, what can you tell me about them? We're going through and getting those. And I think it might even be done. So in a similar way, we're going to take that information. And now we're going to be able to explore that in different ways. So we've got the information. I should say the other thing that I did here, which was different to the example before, was that I'm only interested in active grants. So I'm only interested in those publications that have cited grants that researchers are still active on. And that means we can have a look at the funding profile of researchers that have contributed to COVID-19 research, but the funding from which they were doing that from was obviously as a result of other grants that were not necessarily or couldn't have possibly been specifically about COVID-19. But this is the profile of research funding that's actually powering at least a subset of the research that's going on in COVID-19 research. So we can see it's coming from the National Heart and Lung Blood Institute. It's coming from a number of sources, quite a few of them US-based, some in Japan, we've got the Wellcome Trust, and so on. It's obviously not a complete set because it's representative of those funding sources that we've had, those funding sources that we are able to track inside Dimensions, which is a lot, but obviously not everything. And it does tell us about where things are coming from. We can do a similar thing with the years, and I won't rerun the graph here, but we can actually see, okay, of the researchers that were contributing to COVID-19 research, the grants on which they are listed have different years in which they were started in. And that means probably the way they're contributing to COVID-19 research is different. So if you're contributing to COVID-19 from a position where you're halfway through a research grant, what you can possibly do going forwards is re-steer that research grant or realign that research grant to similar but different questions to the ones you originally positioned to. If your grant was coming in starting from 2016 or 2017, you've actually finished a cycle of grants and you're ready to take up a completely new project. So you're actually much more free to respond to new funding that might be coming around through COVID-19 research. But it's going to be interesting with COVID-19. It's not going to be a case of just saying, here's this new money. Because we need to react so quickly, we need to take some of that existing research that's been funded and refocus it on different things. And so this is one way of articulating what we might need to do as a research community in terms of thinking about how we respond to COVID-19. So I think I'm more or less out of time, or at least I've got some time for some questions. But suffice to say, that's one way of looking at the funding profile coming through. Another way more broadly would be to start with COVID-19's research. In this case, instead of taking out the references to supporting grants, take out all of the authors, create a list of all of the researchers, and then find out what grants they are actively listed on and create a funding profile of those grants. Again, it's going to be the same shape, but now I think we were at $400 million US dollars on this grant. This one now there's potential number of grants up to 2.5 billion, and they're going to be slightly spread over a different set of sponsors. So I think looking at this before, there are some other sponsors in here that are more engineering based as well. So that's coming through. So that is, I apologize that it's a little bit more technical than I was anticipating. I think I'm a bit sleepy today for my explanations. But that's what I wanted to show you about creating funding pipelines from the API. And really it was an exercise in showing you just how far you could take manipulating the data that you got from the API to give you insights relatively quickly from some fairly straightforward queries in the API. So in this case, 3-line query in the API gives you all of the information you need to start building up the funding pipeline, and it's not that much work to do more sophisticated things. So I will stop there and see if we can get some questions. Okay, what would be the way to reduce the granularity of funders to obtain larger groups? So if you wanted to use, I think it's, Michaela, you might want to step in here, but one of the ways I would think of doing that would be to use the organization's search. So you could actually use the organization's search to find out what groups that different institutions belong to. And then you could join that information to your query and then group it back up again. And
yeah. The other way, there's this new feature in Dimensions called organization groups. Mm-hmm. And you can download those definitions, those essentially groups of grid identifiers as a CSV.
Right.
And then you could easily import them into a notebook.
Cool.
Yeah.
And Marianne asks, will there be a specific meeting about Dimensions R? I think there's two answers to that. One is that there has been some community developments around R, but in order for that meeting to be fruitful, we'll need to find someone who's good at using R to analyze data. So we might we might put a call out to the community, Marianne, to see if we can find someone who's using using dimensions with R, and see if they might be interested in doing a guest API.
Yeah.
So one other thing I was thinking about with R is that one of the things you could do with, if you had R sitting beside Python, is that you might just want to do a really simple query in Python. So for instance, just search grants, whatever the query is, and then save those results out to a CSV file and then pick them up in R and do your analysis there. And that might be one way of doing it. There have been some libraries written around R. They won't be as Swiss Army knife as the ones that Michaela's written for Python, but they, I've heard that they're reasonably interesting.
Yeah, we could invite. Well, the Dimensions R library is not maintained by us, so we could invite the maintainer to show it to us in one of the next meetings. Maybe something for us to consider for sure.
Yeah,
you mean Massimo Aria?
Yeah, I'm actually yeah. Luckily enough, I'm actually talking to him tomorrow, so I could ask him. Yeah.
Yeah, please do that. That would be great.
Okay.
What a coincidence.
Yes, I know. Maybe we do it on a Thursday, so on that day, you know, I can go out for a run.
Yep.
I was going to suggest Tuesday, but there you go.
No, of course not.
Great. Any more questions? Simon, any final last wise words?
I would presume that the preceding words are wise, but no, I'm all good. Thanks everyone for continuing to turn up. It's quite affirming.
And I also, there's Sam, you just wrote in the chat that he has developed an example for Dimensions R, which he can share. Sam, if you feel comfortable, if you send it to me, I will include it in the next email so that all more than 150 recipients actually receive it. So I know that a lot of people actually prefer to watch the recording. So if you send it to me and if you feel comfortable with that, I will include it in the email on next Monday.
Yeah, sure. It's just a quick thing I threw together, just like an R Markdown, just to kind of explore Dimensions R as potentially a platform that we could use and maybe even point customers to. I mean, I did find a small hiccup in how it was converting API results to DataFrame, but I think the Massimo Aria might have fixed that recently. I have to kind of dig into it again, but yeah, I'd be happy to send it to you if you want to share it with everyone else.
Perfect. Thank you very much then for participating. Thanks, Simon and Michele. And then we meet again on Thursday, hopefully.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome.
Thank you.
See you then.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.